Hello and welcome again to another edition of Astronomy Spotlight. This one is set up a bit differently because as you can see, we are actually using the planetarium sky from our Digitalis system. It's a lot easier to explain things in the sky using, of course, a simulated version of the sky. So, and those of you who are desperate for the planetarium sky because you've not been able to come to the planetarium for quite a while, this might help as well. This edition is actually, we're going to talk about the vernal equinox, otherwise known as the spring equinox, which occurs this year on March 20th at 4:37 in the morning. Now, as you can see here, I've got the sun up there. It's that kind of bright dot, about halfway up in the southern part of the sky. South is at the bottom here, north is at the top of the screen. And I'm going to turn on the ecliptic line just so you can see where exactly the sun is. There we are, and there's March. Now it's kind of right on the line. Actually, it should be slightly below the line. Actually, that is accurate. Let me turn on the equator line here. Turn off the ecliptic. There we go. And you can see the sun is currently located, as seen from the Earth, very close to what looks like, it says O, 0H. That is 0 hours of right ascension. And that is actually the pivotal point in what defines the spring equinox here in the Northern Hemisphere. So the other pivotal point, of course, is that the sun begins to move above the celestial equator. So it moves from the south to the north. So it actually goes from just below that, that equator line to above the line. So here we go. I've got the sky set at March 15th right now. And so look closely here at the screen. We're going to go in one-day increments, starting with the 15th, and you'll see what happens on the 20th this year. Here we go. There's the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and finally the 20th. Right now, as you can see, the sun has appeared to cross the 0 hour line of right ascension. Lines would kind of like go up and down from north to south here, at least in the sky. And it is also just above the celestial equator. This is also happening, of course, with the Earth's equator, since the celestial equator is simply the Earth's equator extended out into space. Now, in the Northern Hemisphere, this marks the beginning of spring, the spring equinox. In the Southern Hemisphere, it marks the beginning of autumn there. I know a lot of us will be glad to see the end of winter, and especially this year. And the good news is, yes, it happens quite soon. It happens on March 20th, early in the morning. Now, the spring equinox can occur anytime between March 19th and March 21st. Last year, it actually occurred on the 19th of March. But as I said, this year in North America, which is the pivotal point, it happens on the 20th of March. Now, what is so special about the spring equinox, other than the fact that it marks the beginning of spring? Well, that really is the main thing. But it marks the astronomical beginning of spring, which is defined by the sun crossing the celestial equator, moving from south to north. So it goes from just below the equator to above the celestial equator, as it does with the Earth's equator as well. All right, so now let me turn on another line. I want to turn the ecliptic line on. This is the actual path that the sun, the moon, and the 5 visible planets seem to travel along. And as you can see, they sort of intersect. And this is where they intersect is at 0 hours and at the spring equinox this year on March the 20th. Now, as you also may know, or you certainly may have heard, is that this means that the sun rises directly in the east and it sets directly in the west. That is mostly true. And if you happen to live somewhere, which I know most of you do not, most of you are in the northern hemisphere, but if you lived in that band that you see on globes or on maps that says the Tropic of Cancer or the Tropic of Capricorn, if you live between those 2 points, you will actually get to see the sun directly overhead at noon on both the spring and the autumn equinox. So, as I said, if you happen to live between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, you do get to see the sun directly overhead at noon, and noon only, at that point on the equinoxes. But since most of you, I'm guessing, are living in the northern hemisphere, or in the northern hemisphere, but also in North America, you will not get to see that. You will actually get to see it a little bit lower in the sky. It's a bit of a lower angle, and that is because the Earth is tilted on its axis. It is tilted 23.5 degrees. So that causes the Earth's equator not to be at the horizon, but tilted above the horizon a little bit. And it is right where it is as you see it on the screen now in sort of green. Right ascension is similar to longitude lines on the Earth. So longitude, of course, goes north to south. Latitude goes east to west. So there's another, something else we could talk about, and that is declination. And declination corresponds to latitude. But I don't want to talk about that. That's maybe a topic for another day. But certainly right ascension is what we want to talk about right now, because at 0 hours of right ascension, this is where the sun crosses the celestial equator. As you can see, they intersect only at the equinoxes. Now, on the spring equinox, the sun is located in the zodiacal constellation of Pisces the Fishes. Let me turn my constellation art on. You can see there, right where the sun is, slightly below the constellation of Pisces proper, but still inside the boundaries of the constellation, which you may or not be able to see very well at the moment. Let me turn my constellation artwork off. It might be a little bit more visible. Indeed, very slightly more visible. So I turn on the constellation lines. Might be the easiest way to go. So Pisces is right there. Now, in more ancient times, the spring equinox actually occurred in the constellation of Cancer the Crab. And the autumn equinox occurred during, when it occurred in ancient times, in Capricorn. So this is why you have the tropics of Cancer and the tropics of Capricorn. They just left the old tropics. They did not change it with the times. Okay, so I'm going to turn my constellation lines off now. And you might ask, what is the difference between the solstices and the equinoxes? Well, the differences really are that on the solstices, let's just take the summer solstice. At the summer solstice, the sun is highest in the sky. It rises and sets much further north. And at that time, of course, you have the longest day of the year, marking the summer solstice, roughly June 21st. And then the winter solstice occurs roughly the 20th or 21st of December, and that marks the shortest day of the year, whereas the equinoxes, which are at different points during the year, occur when there's roughly the equal amount of day and night. I hope that helps you understand a little bit more about the solstices and the equinoxes and why they occur and why we call them those sorts of things. Please join me again for another edition of Astronomy Spotlight. Thank you for watching.